Hello everybody, happy Easter. Did you guys enjoy the fights last night? I thought it was a really great card, very entertaining, and I thought the production went really well considering that's the inaugural broadcast on that new platform. So I'd like to break down 5 fights for you today. First one being Curmel Moton, UD8, who won versus Anthony Cuba. Second fight, Erislandy Lara retains his title with a KO2 of Michael Zerafa. Third fight, Serhii Bohachuk got the UD12 win over Brian Mendoza. Fourth fight, Isaac Cruz wins the WBA junior welter title, takes it from Romero. And fifth, Sebastian Fundora taking the 2 belts and defeating Tim Tszyu via split decision. So I will bookmark these so you don't have to listen to this in its entirety. You can just jump to whichever fight or fights you'd like to hear about. Okay, so let's start with this young man named Curmel Moton. Now, before yesterday, I'd never heard of him, and that was just his 3rd outing in the professional ranks. Now, the incredible thing about Moton is he's only 17, and in his 3rd pro fight, they decide to match him up for an 8th rounder versus Anthony Cuba, who already had 7 fights and was undefeated, and Cuba, to his credit, absolutely came to fight. He did not come to lie down, as we say. Now, Curmel's first 2 opponents, it was more of a mismatch. One fellow looked like he belonged in a lighter division. I would say both those 2 first guys that Curmel fought were what I call professional opponents. And when somebody's signed to a promoter, that's how it goes. That's how the boxing business goes. It's sort of understood that the signed fighter is going to get fed opponents, aka professional opponents, aka bums, maybe for the first dozen fights or so. But anyways, they decided to move Curmel's opposition up a level, and Curmel did an incredible job. Even though he's only 17, he fought in the amateurs since he was 8, and he did fight the 3-minute rounds for the last 2 years of his, I guess when he's 15 and 16, right? So he did get accustomed to fighting a 3-minute round while he was still an amateur. Now, the important point about Curmel Moton, I think, that we can't overlook is that he's 17, but he does have basically a full-grown man physique. He's got good musculature. But it's not physique alone that when you fight, right? He's also got excellent, solid fundamentals. He's got good balance, good footwork. He's got good hand speed. He's got incredible power for someone who's still a teenager. And he knows how to put punches together. He knows how to use defensive tactics properly, how to slip, how to roll, weave. At the moment, he looks like he's what they call, the total package in the ring. So he did land varieties of punches. He threw combinations. He threw to both the body and the head, and in the end, it was a right hand to the body that really damaged Anthony Cuba, along with lots of left hooks. Mind you, both fighters, Cuba did throw his hard right as well. They both, in fact, sometimes they threw simultaneous overhand right hands. But bottom line is that was an interesting, pleasing surprise to see Curmel Moton in his 3rd fight. And the main thing for him is, because he's so young and because he has a great foundation of fundamental skills, I would say, hey, let's hope they can keep him active and busy and let him fight as frequently as he's able to, because when you're that age, your recovery is great, and you can put up with that type of fight volume. But even more importantly, for a fighter like Curmel Moton, he will learn during the fights. Every time he fights, I bet he'll be able to step himself up another level of just knowing what to do and when to do it in the actual fight scenario. So I think that his development would be expedited if they can get him to fight with good frequency. Now, I have no idea what type of business deal he has, but I would guess if his management is savvy, they're going to say, hey, let's not always wait necessarily for a TV fight. Even though they want to give him the exposure, I think it's more important for somebody like a Curmel Moton to just fight frequently. And so let him fight these professional opponents on an off-TV date somewhere, and let him just continue to learn. But I do look forward to seeing more of this young man down the road. Okay, so second fight I'd like to talk about is on the other end of the age spectrum. We have Erislandy Lara at 40 years old, who got a second round knockout of Michael Zerafa to defend his WBA middleweight belt for the second time. So on paper, Lara is 33-3 with 18 KOs, and Zerafa is 31-5-0 with 19 KOs. So they look pretty close in terms of those numbers, right? But that's why we fight boxing fights and don't just run stats. Right off the bat, it was pretty clear that Lara was winning the battle of the jabs, as they say, because Lara is the southpaw versus the right-handed Michael Zerafa. So Lara was the one that was able to penetrate, shall we say, with the jab and land his jab, whereas Zerafa was falling short. And Lara just was patient the first round and tested Zerafa out with his jab. And then second round, he just timed it perfectly and countered Zerafa's jab with his own jab right hand, or jab left hand, and that was it. He landed that straight left just so precisely right on the chin, dropped Zerafa straight back. Now, if the ropes hadn't been there, Zerafa would have banged the back of his head on the ring, but the bottom rope caught his head. So fortunately, that didn't happen. But that was basically it. He couldn't continue after that. So huge props to Erislandy Lara for a successful second defense of his belt, and more power to him. That's one where it just shows us how patience and experience really can pay off. Of course, Lara has an extensive amateur pedigree through the Cuban system and whatnot, but I guess I'm pointing to the fact that we can't just write somebody off because they're over, say, 35. Okay, so third fight was Serhii Bohachuk, who took the WBC interim super welterweight belt by defeating Brian Mendoza pretty handily. Now remember, Serhii was originally supposed to fight Sebastian, and then because Keith Thurman got injured, I'll double back to that, they moved Sebastian Fundora up to fight Tim Tszyu for 2 belts, and brought in Brian Mendoza, who beat Sebastian before, so he's sort of a justifiable matchup to bring him in versus Serhii. So right off the bat, you know, Serhii just maintained a super tight defense with both hands up, you know, palms facing in, and he kind of hunches into his guard, and he maintains that, very disciplined, maintains that guard from at all distances. Especially now, I think he kind of maybe learned his lesson. He maintains a good guard and defense up close, because his one loss was him getting KO'd. Maybe because he got a little careless and got clipped. Even though he was delivering hard punches in that fight where he got stopped. In any case, in this go round, Bohachuk maintained that tight defense and just walked Mendoza down and just kept up constant pressure, constant volume at a pretty steady pace. He didn't do anything fancy with his feet or with his hands. He just used classic combinations, you know, jab, right hand, left hook, and then work downstairs as well. And every now and again when they got inside, Bohachuk would throw a nice tight little right uppercut. But kind of the story in this fight was like, how did Brian Mendoza manage to just tough it out for those 12 rounds? Two judges had Bohachuk winning 10 rounds and gave 2 to Mendoza, and one judge had it I think one had it 10-2 and 2 judges has it 9 rounds for Bohachuk and 3 rounds for Mendoza. But it was a pretty one-sided affair, let's put it that way. Mendoza maintained a huge left hematoma on his left cheek. It was pretty huge. But the one question I have is I don't understand why Brian Mendoza constantly takes steps backwards. He just continually backed himself into the ropes and then would back himself into the corner, which is just a incredibly bad tactic no matter what. You know, you really don't want to play the Ali rope-a-dope thing and put yourself on the ropes like that and hope to counterpunch somebody. That's, first of all, that's a high-level black belt move, but you should avoid that at all costs. If you have the skills to do that, you should beat the person in the center of the ring. Regardless, that's one thing I would really question about Mendoza. Like, why do you do that? But then the second thing that struck me was, you know, he has an incredible heart, and he managed to rally in the final rounds and actually gave some back to Bohachuk. To Bohachuk's corner's credit, they did warn him, hey man, this guy is going to be dangerous to the final belt, which he was, and which he is, because he has that ability to summon something up from the pit of his stomach and throw hard punches. Now, for those of you who are New Yorkers, maybe you remember trying to be a New York Knicks fan in the late 90s, early 2000s. That's kind of like what watching the final few rounds of this fight was for me, if you were rooting for Brian Mendoza. Because it's like, oh my goodness, why didn't you do this from the outset? Like, why did you wait till so late to do this kind of rally, you know? And that's kind of how Knicks fans felt for that whole entire little era of basketball in New York. I mean, it was like super frustrating because they managed to let the game slip away and then rally hard in the fourth, and you're like, it's kind of too late now, guys, what are you doing? And then they'd even let Patrick Ewing push him out there on the hardwood, and he'd have to hobble around on his horrible knees and try to turn the game around, which he would because he was Patrick Ewing. But it was just really tough to watch as a New York Knicks fan back then. In any case, props to Serhii Bohachuk, because you know, he's used to knocking guys out, and I guess that's just sort of part of his wiring. But he did maintain patience and a level head, and I shouldn't say just win the fight, but just win the fight by applying constant pressure and constant volume. not feeling like he absolutely had to go for the knockout. So that was that shows he has the ability to grow and to listen to his corner and to adjust his sort of internal tendencies in a fight. So props to Serhii Bohachuk, who retained his WC interim super welterweight belt again. Okay, third fight. Isaac Cruz moves up to 140 pounds for the first time in his professional career and becomes world champion by knocking out Romero. Now, something tells me a lot of fans aren't too upset to see Rolly dethroned, as it were. And I'll admit up front, yeah, I didn't even bother doing a breakdown of this fight, mainly because I kind of don't like... I don't have much to say about Rolly Romero as a fighter. Like, forget about the personal stuff, but just as a fighter. Rolly is kind of on the opposite of Moton. Rolly is so fundamentally flawed. He has poor footwork. He has no jab. He just uses the jab hand to kind of paw and post on his opponent's head, and then he tries to drop in a hard right or a hard power punch, left hook or something. And then, all his flaws were apparent in this fight versus Isaac Cruz. Now, Isaac, got Rolly in trouble right off the bat. Like, right in the first round, Isaac, while they were inside, Isaac fired a short little left hook that rocked Rolly, and Rolly looked like, I guess a newborn baby horse that's just stumbling around and can't get its legs under him. I mean, he almost went down. If Rolly was not so athletic, then he probably would have gotten dropped from that exchange. But he managed to stay upright and make it to the end of that round. Isaac, to his credit, didn't, immediately, like, just throw, everything in the kitchen sink at Rolly right away. He just kept up the pressure, kept walking Rolly down. Isaac was very patient, but when a fighter puts up the double guard where they put both forearms in front of their face, so their palms are facing them, it's kind of a sign of, like, disrespect in a way. Like, I have no respect for you as a fighter, so I'm just gonna put both hands up and I'm gonna walk straight at you, and you're not gonna be able to do anything to me. That seemed to be the attitude that Cruz had. Now, Rolly what he was trying to do was just move laterally around the perimeter of the ring with that sidestep thing. Now that sidestep, I have to tell you, I consider that like sub-amateur, like sub-rank amateur, because if you rely on that sidestepping for the bulk of your defensive tactics, that's just not boxing. You have to learn how to not get hit, but still be in position to hit. You don't just run around the ring with a sidestep like that, because obviously the other person can't land on you, but you're in no position to land on the other person while you're sidestepping around like that. And that's the bulk of Rolly's defense. Then when he decided to stop doing that and maybe come forward, he'd come forward. If he missed with a punch, he'd just fall into the clinch, and then he would hold Isaac. And the referee, this happened so frequently that the referee did, after giving Rolly a warning, the ref did deduct a point from Rolly for holding, because he was, that was his answer to missing with his shot. He'd just fall into Isaac and then hold. But again, Isaac was just super patient, and when he was able to land his super hard shots. He almost himself also pretty much abandoned the jab and just figured he'd just walk Rolly down and then get to him with hard shots, which he did, like overhand rights, left hooks, left body shots, right body shots. And the end came when Isak just unloaded with tons of just, I think maybe a series of 4 or 5 power shots that were just right hooks, left hooks in repetition. Rolly had no answer, and he didn't get dropped, but it was pretty clear that he was taking too much damage in that exchange and was about to just take more, so the ref stepped in and stopped the fight. Now Rolly, he did start late in boxing in that he didn't start until he was 19 as an amateur, and just boxed for I think a year or two as an amateur, and then immediately or a year maybe, and immediately turned pro. Now here's a question I have for you guys. Do you think Rolly was manufactured as a champion? Because he won that WBA strap by beating Ismael Barroso I think last year. So what do you guys think? Was because Rolly's so fundamentally flawed, it almost seems like he would be ripe for the picking of whomever wanted to step up to him. So tell me what you guys think in the comments. Yeah, I mean, but hats off to Isak Cruz regardless of Rolly's flaws, because Isak did what he had to do. He didn't fall for any of the hype or the trash talking, and he just obviously had a lot of confidence in himself, even though this is his first fight ever at 140, and he simply walked down Rolly and threw hard power punches, overhand rights, left hooks, and got Rolly out of there. Okay, so props to Isak Cruz. So finally, main event of the evening, Fundora versus Tszyu, and Fundora walks away with not only the vacant WBC belt, but also the WBO belt that Tim was holding at 154. Alright, so now this was a split decision. One judge did give the fight to Tszyu. I think one judge gave Tim Tszyu 8 rounds and 4 to Fundora, but the other 2 judges gave 8 and 7 to Fundora. So Fundora gets a W on this one. Okay, now the first thing right off the bat, I don't know, did any of you guys anticipate this? Because I didn't. But Fundora did revise himself. Like Fundora 2.0, he actually bladed himself. So he turned his shoulders, which is what I felt he should have been doing from the get-go. That serves 2 purposes, right? That puts his jab hand closer to the opponent, and it takes away the target area for his opponent, right? Because he's more sideways, there's less surface area straight in front of you to hit. Whereas before, Fundora would sort of turn and fall in and be more square to his opponent, so you have a bigger surface area, target area. But yeah, right off the bat in round 1, you're like, oh, okay, he actually addressed that. So props to Sebastian and his team for working hard enough to make that type of transition in style. This allowed him to finally use his height and reach to his advantage, and not fall in immediately to just start trading on the inside. Now, I thought Tim actually had a pretty good first round. He was doing well with the battle of the jabs, right? Tim being the righty versus Sebastian being the lefty. The jab's always going to line up and sort of nullify each other. But Tim was, Tim is very, very good at parrying with either hand, and so he's parrying and trying to get that jab in over top. He also landed a right hand to Sebastian's head in that first round and snapped Sebastian's head straight back. So that was a good sort of bit of first round measurement for Tim. Now, unfortunately, if things turn around, as you guys know, you saw the pictures, second round, right at the end, Tim kind of jumps in while they're inside and manages to smack his head against Sebastian's elbow, which Sebastian was just holding in a normal position as his guard position. Because he's so tall, his elbow, when Tim's kind of bending, crouching down, his elbow's at right at Tim's head level. Kind of something I don't think any of us anticipated. Probably was a cut, certainly a cut on the head, given, you know, most of the times you get cuts from headbutts, and there was not really much chance of these two guys butting heads unless Fundora came all the way on the inside and leaned over. In which case, it would, you know, I suppose that could happen. But regardless, so now Tim unfortunately got a really bad deep cut on the sort of left side of his scalp, and it was already it's on the scalp, so the cut is within the hair, and that is one of the most difficult types of cuts to close. But I'm gonna go on a bit of a tangent here about cuts, because I really feel this likely cost Tim his belt. And I'm speaking of Tim's corner was not able to close that cut properly. And I'm not sure what exactly they had on that Q-tip. That the cut man was sticking a Q-tip in the cut, like aligned with the cut, and then it looked like he was just kind of plopping a towel on top of it, and then at the end putting a big glob of Vaseline on top of the cut, which didn't do anything to stop the bleeding, because there's already blood trickling down as Tim's standing up to head out for the next round. And this was from rounds after round 2 to the end of the fight. They just were not able to stop the flow of blood. Now here's the thing, you never want to go cheap on your cut man. In fact, a fighter should be happy to pay their cut man for doing as little as possible. They're the one person in your corner, in your camp, that you're like, you know what, I don't want you to bust yourself doing a lot of work, because the less work you do means the better off I am. You don't want your cut man doing work, but the point is, you never want to go cheap on them, because when you need them, you really, really need them. And in this case, unfortunately, you needed them for a title fight. You needed them to close that cut. So here's my questions for the Tim Tszyu corner. Did the cut man have all the medicines that cut men are allowed to use to close a cut? They're allowed to use thrombin, they're allowed to use adrenaline, and they're allowed to use something called Avatine. Now, I can remember my trainer out of Brooklyn, Lennox Blackmore, he would always make sure he had those substances with him when he worked the fight, or when he worked my fights. And there are trainers who just say, hey, I'm the trainer, I'm also going to be the cut man. So they kind of let you know, and they let whoever else is in the corner know that should a cut occur, or should you get a bleeding nose or cut on the lip, on the mouth, that they're the ones that are going to address it. So in other words, they don't really need the second assist, who might also be a licensed cut person, cut man. They don't need them to deal with the cut. All right, so I was fortunate enough to have 2 legendary cut men work my corners. One was the late great Al Gavin out of New York City, and the other was the late great Joe Souza out of Texas. And I did get the chance to kind of pick Joe Souza's brain a little bit about how he closed cuts and whatnot, and he let me in a couple of secrets that I'm not going to share. But one thing he did say was, you know, to close a cut, that's one key thing: pressure. You have to apply pressure. Now, I didn't see that from Tim's corner, so there's 2 questions there. You know, one is, did you have those medications on the Q-tip. I mean, it's impossible to tell what someone has on a Q-tip if they have anything. Second thing is, why do you not know how to close one of those cuts, or did you just opt to apply pressure straight down? Because that's not going to close that type of cut. Not sure what they were thinking. But in any case, so back to the fight. Well, unfortunately for Tim, that because they weren't able to sort of stop the flow of blood, it kept dripping in his eye, or trickling down his forehead into his eye. So he's constantly distracted by that, trying to kind of paw the blood away from his eye. Certainly he's not able to see as well as he would otherwise. But so it was sort of obvious, I think, for Sebastian at that point to just start flicking that jab out there, constantly bothering the cut and constantly just keeping Sergei's, or no, not Sergei, keeping keeping Tim's sort of left side immersed. Or now it's a hard ask of Tim Tszyu when he's suffering a cut that's not been closed. But I still have a couple questions about his game plan while he's in there. It seemed to me that Tim was headhunting when I felt like, hey, like, why not go to the body? Be a body hunter, be a body snatcher rather than a headhunter. But it just seemed like he was intent on landing on Fundora's head. So, and then the second point was, again, it's a hard ask, but knowing that your depth perception is compromised because you can't really see very well out of one eye, then and you are now fighting on feel, that's sort of even more of a reason to try to like use angles and get to the body. And as I had mentioned in the other breakdown, once you land on the body, you know the head is straight up. Just rake your hand straight up that center line and go for the chin. But you can do that blindly. You don't need your eyes on somebody's head if you've landed to the body already, if you're going straight up that center line. Now those are just two questions I have, and unfortunately we were not let in on what was going on in Tim's corner because there was no translator. I'm going to come back to that in a second. But to Fundora's credit, he kept up the volume, he kept his composure, and he did what he had to do to win the fight, which is just keep peppering that jab. Now, I'm not a fan of Fundora's jab because it's really more of a flick, and his elbow's out and he's kind of flicking a back fist rather than using a stabbing jab or a penetrating jab. But you know what, at his height, with his reach, he can get away with it, so fine. He used it, it did its job, and then and Fundora pulled off the W. But the bigger credit I give him is for all that hard work he and his team obviously did in the gym prior to this fight. They must have been working really, really hard to get him to kind of change his boxing stance and his style and just his mindset of what it is that he's trying to do once he steps through the ropes. So coming back to the whole Tim Tszyu corner question, so yeah, I have one lingering question about the whole production, which is I don't think it's a newsflash that Tim Tszyu's corner speaks Russian. So you gave us translators in the corner for Spanish to English. For the Spanish-speaking corners, if Tim Tszyu is the main event, why did you not hire a Russian to English translator so we could understand what was being said in Tim's corner? Very odd. So now, here I'm going to go back to that whole, for the heck of it, go back to the whole conspiracy theory thing. It just begs a question, because originally Tim held the WBO belt and he was supposed to fight Keith Thurman in a 12-rounder non-title fight as the main event on the inaugural show on this new platform. Very odd, because typically TV stations, platforms, they want a main event to be for a world title. And, you know, back in the day of cable television, they almost didn't care. They didn't care, really, as long as they could sell to the public, hey, this is the main event. It's for a world championship boxing fight. So you could come up with a really kind of lame world title fight, and they'd still accept it because they could feel they could sell it to the general population. Would get pulled into this notion that this made up world title is a world championship boxing fight. So I just thought that was odd from the get-go, that they would even think of putting on a main event non-title fight. Second thing is, like, when Keith Thurman gets this bicep tear, he did post a copy of a document, but has anyone seen the bicep tear? I don't know, maybe, I mean, I haven't scoured the internet for it, but, you know, athletes are really, we like to kind of like brag about our injuries like they're badges of honor, and any type of ligament or muscle tear, it's pretty dramatic because you get a nice dark purple stain somewhere. Usually it's the lowest part adjacent to wherever that tear took place. So I would, because that's where the blood all pools, right? So I'd imagine you tear your bicep, there's probably all this huge purple splotch on the inside of your arm and right in the crook of your elbow. But it's pretty dramatic and almost like something you're obligated to post on social media, right? I mean, I don't know. So you guys let me know if you've seen Keith Thurman's actual bicep tear. But knowing how the boxing business goes, and here's props to somebody posted a comment on my Tszyu Fundora breakdown that Fundora has a very wily manager, the fellow with the beard and the mustache, who also can speak fluent Spanish, and so they said don't count him out because look who his manager is. And, you know, point well taken now, because it would not shock me greatly if they actually did use Keith as kind of a placeholder. And you know, because as I pointed out earlier, Keith comes across really well on camera. He can sell a fight, and then they probably, you know, you would make a deal with Keith and say, hey, look, you know, you do this for us, we'll take care of you, whatever that means. I mean, maybe it means throwing a fight down the road. Can't actually write them a check, but you can reward people in many ways, right? Doesn't have to be a check for services rendered. So maybe they just cut a deal with Keith Thurman, told him, you know, you play this like you're gonna fight Tszyu, do all the PR, and then you're gonna fall out with an injury, and don't worry, we'll take care of you. So that would actually fit perfectly for Fundora, because of course he was already preparing supposedly for a right-hander anyways, so it looks like a logical thing to move him up, right? But then again, why didn't you move Bohachuk up? I don't know. I'm just a little suspicious, because boxing business is a lot of machinations and a lot of maneuvering. But let me know what you guys think. Do you think that was all set up from the get-go? How did you guys enjoy the fights? What were your favorite moments? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you for listening.